What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And trust me, today you're in for a special treat. We are diving back into the Lori Vallow Daybell story. It is day 4 of her long-awaited murder trial inside a Boise, Idaho courtroom, not to be confused with Boise, which is how outsiders say it. And today we're going to explore the question, were Lori and Chad in the cult of crazy? And we've got an expert here who's going to answer that question for us. Of course, this is the trial of the so-called Doomsday Mom. It is a wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who becomes involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her very own children. Best guest today, Rick Ross, and not the rapper, Rick Allen Ross. He is a cult intervention specialist and frequently a court expert witness concerning groups called cults, and we'll find out exactly what cults are. He was contacted by the grandparents of JJ before and after Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were arrested, and we'll speak to him about that. He is the founder and executive director of the Cult Education Institute and the author of Cults Inside Out. You might want to grab that book ahead of this trial, Cults Inside Out. Ann Bremner is a trial attorney joining us for the first time and one of the nation's most recognized legal analysts. In her 35 years of practice, she has been lead counsel for many high-publicized court cases and was a prosecuting attorney for the criminal division of the King County Prosecutor's Office in Seattle from 1983 to 88. She's a regular on TV and cable, including Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and what used to be, I guess it still is, HLN, but they're doing less programming these days. And last but certainly not least, Joshua Ritter, named the 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year by the Association of Deputy District Attorneys upon joining his current personal injury firm. Is it Eldab or Eldabe?
Eldabe.
Eldabe. I got it wrong both ways. He's a member of Eldabe Ritter trial lawyers. Josh has continued to devote his talents to the tenacious and zealous defense of his clients. Before we get going, just a quick reminder, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. You can support us as a YouTube member and on Patreon. And I apologize. I'm sucking down Ricolas. You should sponsor us, Ricola. I've got a horrible cough, and I don't mean to be rude, but it is what it is. So we are day 4 of jury selection. The last number I saw, and STS Nation, I'm sure will update us, was we were at 39 jurors. We needed 3 more to get to the magic number of 42. And once they get to 42, each side's going to have 12 strikes, and they'll be finished. Opening statements set to get underway, apparently, on Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. local time. And to you first, just take us through this. They're trying to get a pool of 42 jurors. They're at 39 now. They may have picked a few more since coming on air. What does this mean in terms of going forward? It seems like they're on a pretty good pace.
Yeah, it's a lot better than I thought it would be. I thought there was an astronomically high number of jurors summoned for the initial, veneer, more than I've ever seen in a case. So to be at this point right now and being ready to open on Monday, to me is very surprising, but is encouraging, in terms of the pace. When you're picking a jury for a case like this, it's very difficult. You're dealing with potentially cults, you're dealing with religion, you're dealing with, of course, all of these deaths, and then the media that's been everywhere. I'm right here in Washington next to Idaho. I mean,
and Ann just popped off, so we'll get her back on. Josh, I'm going to hand the baton to you. At 39, the magic number is 42. Ann, do we have you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, someone was calling on here. I didn't stop that. So I think that this is a case that has a lot of complex issues to explore in voir dire and jury selection. And apparently they're getting through that more quickly than I anticipated.
And Josh, this is probably more of a question for Rick, but we'll get to him on this as well. You're dealing, as Ann just said, and the reason we have Rick on today, with the issue of cults. How does that complicate picking a jury, especially coming from the part of the state where there are a lot of members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, not so much in Boise necessarily, but how does it complicate things?
No, that's a really good point. I think they're going to have to explore that, both sides, really, just to see. It's one of those religions that kind of polarizes some folks. People believe strongly in it. Some other people have some strong feelings about it. So I think they're going to want to voir dire on the potential jurors' feelings about that. And especially knowing where we're going with all of this, that they, not only had religious beliefs, but took them to the extreme, to the fringe of those beliefs, and how people might react to that. If that plays a role in the defense case, certainly they're going to want to know if there are jurors who are sitting there that are just going to carry some sort of bias with them into the deliberation room.
Frankie Fig says, happy Thursday, everyone. She is a big friend of the show, as is my favorite name, Shaquille Oatmeal, who says, hello there. Yes, Lori's a little bit of both. I think I was posing a question. She part of the cult of crazy. And he says she's just overall a hot, stanking mess. So that's Shaq's take on Lori Vallow Daybell. Rick, this is the first comment in the queue here. It says, from CS, the ideas for this cult seem to have been sourced from a bunch of different religions and New Age spirituality. Seems like Scientology with the wannabe author, sci-fi, kids as adults, and small bodies. Let's have you react to that comment, and then we're going to dig really deep into all this as we go forward, of course, with our two attorneys as well. But your reaction to this comment?
Well, I think that's a good comment, because many times cult leaders simply grab from popular culture, various religions, and put together a composite. And so it is not uncommon for that to happen. And I think Chad Daybell, who I regard as the cult leader, that's what he did. His background is Mormon. He graduated from BYU. But you could see Daybell as almost kind of an affinity fraud kind of person, because he targeted Mormons. He looked for people that were devoutly religious, like Lori Vallow, and he kind of pecked away at a group called Prepare a People, which was essentially Mormons who were focused on end times and preparing for the end times. And so Daybell, who wrote these doomsday books and prophecies and claimed to have revelation from God, he was really targeting in a very knowing and specific way the Mormon community and people who were devoutly religious and focused on end of the world scenarios.
And Rick, I've known you for 8 minutes and 21 seconds, but I can tell you're a sweet guy, a kind guy, just by talking to you for this short time. How does a man like you, how did you get so involved in the study of cults?
Well, that's an interesting question for Pesach. I'm Jewish, and a group, a very extreme religious group, infiltrated the paid professional staff of a Jewish nursing home in the early 80s, and they targeted my grandmother. So I had a Yiddish Bubby who came from Poland in 1906 through Ellis Island, and she was 82, and quite frankly, I was pissed. And so I started out as an anti-cult activist, community organizer. I worked for the Jewish community, and then gradually became fascinated with the issue of cults and began doing intervention work, and then later court expert testimony and so on. So, but it started as being an activist because they went after my grandmother.
Exacting revenge for a booby could be the best motivator there is in the world, it sounds like. Jay Thomas writes, this is the craziest story. And then we've got hello from London. Hello, everyone watching from Mexico. So we've got the global audience is here and in full force. And back to you. Opening statements set to start Monday morning. We just came off the Alec Murdaugh trial. They picked that jury in, I believe, 3 days. The trial went for a little less than 6 weeks. In this instance, there were actually, as you alluded to, expecting it to take longer to pick a jury. So it looks like things are moving along swiftly. What will the state and the defense be doing this weekend ahead of opening statements to prepare? I assume they will not be out partying or taking the weekend off, but instead working diligently.
Well, sure, they probably wrote their opening statements a long time ago. I mean, but of course, they'll be working hard to polish their statements up so they'll have an excellent presentation for the jurors. There's a rule out there, and there's no citation for it, but it says 80% of jurors make up their mind in opening statement, and they never change their mind. And they just filter the evidence through what they decided in an opening statement. So both sides need to hit it out of the ballpark, I think, especially in a case like this. And the defense for Lori's gotten better. Of course, now the death penalty is off the table. But, you kind of look at this and wonder what was going on with her. Was it Chad, that was basically the instigator because he was the guru and she was kind of a luckless, love interest, or is she the one, behind these terrible deaths? So there's a lot of convincing to do on both sides. But I think right now the defense has a lot of work to do.
And Josh, are you in agreement with that number? About 80% make up their mind in opening statements. And is it super critical to get it right out of the batter's box?
I've never heard that number, but I agree with it. I think those first impressions are so critically important. It's funny. Sometimes you'll see the defense take this tactic of reserving their opening statements and choosing to give their opening statement before they begin their case in chief. Always thought that was such a huge mistake, because then what you've allowed is the prosecution narrative to just sit there through the first few weeks of trial. And that's all they know is just what they've been presented in the prosecution's theory of this case, hearing their evidence. And by the time you get up as a defense attorney, give your closing argument, they're perhaps already way down that road and there's no turning them back around. So I do agree. Absolutely. These are really important statements that are going to take place coming up on Monday. But I'll say, I think saying Monday is pretty ambitious if they don't have a sworn jury at this point.
Yeah.
Interesting. Time will tell if it indeed does happen. I guess we've got the rest of today in Idaho time, and then all day tomorrow. So we'll see if they can get it done. Patricia Burns, Rick here writes, the grandiose nature of a narcissist would dictate Lori feeling like she was important enough to be the godhead of a new religion and allow her to make decisions on life and death. Do you agree with that? And also, Rick, I just want to ask you, when you first got wind of this story and you heard about these zombies and the deaths of the children, what was your reaction to that? Did you instinctively know this was some sort of cult behavior?
I very much thought it was cult behavior from the very beginning, even before the grandparents contacted me. I mean, look, Chad Daybell looked at those children as dead weight. They were not something that he wanted to take responsibility for. So he characterized them as zombies. He created a religious belief system to essentially dispense with their existence. All he wanted was Lori. Probably he also wanted Charles Vallow's insurance money. And of course, he wanted his wife, Tammy Daybell, that insurance money. And there was even more insurance money that was coveted by Daybell from another husband that he couldn't quite recruit. So what he was doing was creating this tight-knit group that he said must go to Idaho, which would be the final refuge for the end times, where they would have a place of safety. And again, this is reminiscent of many cults that I've dealt with, where the leader uses some kind of catastrophic prediction or doomsday to leverage control of the people in the group, specifically to make them feel they must relocate and they must depend upon the leader for a sense of safety in the coming days.
And it seems like in almost every instance, and I am no cult expert, that they're leveraging that power for either sex or money or both. Is that accurate?
Well, Chad Daybell certainly was interested in sex. I mean, he basically, it looks like, got rid of his wife, who wasn't that supportive of his religious views and his book business. And then he targeted Lori Daybell. I think that Lori Daybell might be characterized as narcissistic, but I would see Chad Daybell as what I would consider a covert narcissist, seemingly introverted, quiet, subdued, but nevertheless deeply narcissistic. When you read excerpts from his books regarding his vision and how special he is and everything, that comes through very strongly.
And I'm going to get back to Josh and Ann in just one moment, but I've got to ask you the most obvious of questions, which I don't think some people, including myself, necessarily know the answer to. What is a cult? How is it defined?
A cult, my definition is pretty narrow and rather conservative. It's based on a paper published at Harvard University, submitted by psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton back in the 80s. There are three core characteristics that, if you will, form the nucleus for a definition of a destructive cult. Number one, an absolute totalitarian leader that becomes an object of worship. He or she is the defining element and driving force of the group. And then two, that leader uses identifiable techniques of coercive persuasion and thought reform to gain undue influence over his or her followers. And then finally, that if the group is to be considered a destructive group, that the group does harm to the members. Now, that varies by degree from group to group. So it could be just take the money and run, or extort money from the members, require free labor and make money from that, or it can escalate to criminal behavior, and in the most extreme groups, quite violent criminal behavior. For example, Charles Manson, Jim Jones, David Koresh. And I see Chad Daybell fitting the role of the absolute authoritarian leader, also using techniques such as social isolation and control of communication to sustain undue influence. And then finally, that he has been incredibly destructive.
And we'll dig deeper in mentioning David Koresh. Rick does go all the way back to the Waco days, which we'll ask him about a little later in the show. Papa Bear, our favorite, or amongst our favorite STS Nation members out of Idaho, of course, from Moscow, Idaho, the site of those horrible quadruple homicides. Shout out to Abby, who wants Phil Waters, who will be on tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern time. She wants to have Phil adopt her. We'll see if that can happen. Greetings from Norway as well. And there was some other big news today out of the courtroom, and that is Judge Boyce made a pretty big ruling. Kay Woodcock, of course, the grandmother of JJ and Ty Lee. Summer Shiflett is Lori's sister, and Colby Ryan, of course, Lori's son. He ruled that they can all attend the trial for Lori Vallow Daybell. Larry Woodcock is not considered a victim, according to Boyce. Is this the right ruling here to let the family members in to watch? They desperately wanted to.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we have victims' rights laws under the federal system and all over throughout the states. I mean, the right to be heard, right to be informed, and the right to participate from the beginning of the trial to the end, all the way to sentencing. And so for them to be able to watch the trial, that's imperative. I mean, not only for that reason, but also the public is entitled to attend. That's why we have cameras in the courtroom, under the Constitution. And it's not just the right of the public. People always say that, to watch. It's really the right of the accused, too, to have the trial scrutinized by the public. That's an important part of our constitutional rights when someone goes to trial. So I think it's a great ruling by the judge, and the exclusionary rule on keeping witnesses out. That whole thing is to make sure that you don't have collusion in testimony and somebody say something that they heard someone else say. And there's no danger. I don't know if they're witnesses here, but if indeed they are, there probably wouldn't be a danger that they would base their testimony on somebody else's in a way that would not be appropriate.
And Josh, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but Judge Boyce, and I'm not an attorney, ruled that Larry Woodcock is not considered a victim. Does that mean only his wife will be allowed to attend? Do you know? Are you clear on that or not?
Yeah, my understanding was the wife is allowed to attend because of what Ann pointed out there. She's got a victim's rights to be there and attend the hearing and watch. But the judge, I think, was kind of splitting hairs to some extent because that person that he's not allowing in is going to be set to testify. And once he testifies, he's going to be allowed to attend the proceedings as well. And it's for the reason that Ann pointed out. balancing all of this, the judge has the interests of the victims and being able to watch this, but at the same time, he wants to protect the sanctity of the proceedings and make sure that no one is being influenced by prior testimony when they get up to give testimony. So that's why once he's done testifying, he'll be allowed to remain in court.
And then on the flip side, Tammy Daybell's family, they were denied the right to watch the trial remotely. Earlier in the year, her brother Benjamin Douglas and father Ronald made requests to watch the ongoing trial remotely. Mr. Douglas, Benjamin Douglas, and his father, they both live in Utah. They argued, the lawyer did in their filing, that they have a right and responsibility to bear witness to Lori Vallow's trial, but it would be difficult to attend in person. The father is 80 and his wife is 76 years old, and said that they were simply not in good enough health to travel, but they were denied this right. Is that a mistake on the part of the judge? And I'll couple that with what you mentioned about cameras in the courtroom. There are no cameras in the courtroom for this trial, so they can't even watch it if they want to.
Right. And so I disagree with that. And I think we should have cameras in the courtroom. We always hear people saying, like in certain trials, Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, why weren't there cameras? Well, that's federal. So there's never cameras in the federal system. The Supreme Court has looked at this again, and they've still said no cameras. But in the state system, you can have cameras, of course. And I think this case should have cameras. I mean, the Michael Jackson trial didn't have cameras. The Scott Peterson trial did have cameras. O.J. Simpson did have cameras. I mean, I think, of course, Johnny Depp did have cameras. Murdoch had cameras. The public has a right to know, and we need to be transparent in the system. And we also need to include those that maybe can't travel to the trial because of, physical infirmities. And so I don't understand. I just never understand judges that say, oh, we're not going to have cameras. Unless they're thinking, and I've been talking about this case in connection with the Trump case. You look at the Shepard versus Maxwell case from 1966. That was Sam Shepard was accused of killing his wife, his pregnant wife. The Fugitive series apparently came from that case. There was so much bad publicity before that trial and so much attention on that trial that the Supreme Court of the United States reversed a murder conviction. So is the judge worried about that? Why not let the cameras in? Then you can have the press see exactly what's happening and the public see exactly what's happening. But I don't think it'll result in some undue media attention that could result in a reversal.
And Josh, do you agree with that? We had the other day, we had Dave Leroy on, who is the former Attorney General of the state of Idaho. He was fine with no cameras, as was a former prosecuting attorney in Ada County. I was a little surprised. They say that the trial is essentially really for the jury, of their peers, and not so much for the public, but it is a public court. So do you lean on Ann's side or the side of Dave Leroy?
I'm going to agree with Ann on this one. I'm for more transparency. I don't listen. Years ago, you could understand perhaps the argument that it's going to affect the jurors too much. They're going to be influenced by it. They're going to be distracted by it. It's going to create this kind of media frenzy that we don't want to have affect the outcome of the trial. But we live in this age where everything's televised. I mean, it's now the exception when it's not televised. And so I think that we're far more savvy as a culture and can handle the idea of cameras being inside the courtroom. I think it does add transparency to the whole thing. And I think for a judge to say in this case, well, I don't want to add to the media attention. Well, that train has left the station. This case is under incredible media attention. People are following it. There's kind of a ravenous appetite to understand, for one, I think you have the horrible idea of children being murdered by their own mother, but just to understand the process of how our judicial system takes place. I don't have a problem with more cameras unless it somehow is just so going to affect the sanctity of that proceeding that you feel like you can't have it. But I don't see how that applies here.
And Michelle writes, hi, everyone from South Africa. Cult of crazy indeed. Irene, hello from California. Nightwood, hi from Chicago. Evening from Scotland. Look at this. We even got great guests. Hello from Desert Hills, Arizona. We've got all the demographics covered. And this is 100% a true statement. Great guest. We've got the best guest in true crime. And I was just thinking, as Josh was answering, you're not going to see 3 high caliber guests like this at one time on any of those cable shows. So you're wasting your time. You're in the right place at the right time, and you can watch it whenever you want. Rick, I don't know. Are you able to discuss, because I know it's a client relationship, but the Woodcocks did reach out to you. Are you able to tell us where that all stands now and why they reached out initially?
Well, they're not my clients. They reached out because they wanted to understand what was going on with Lori. They were befuddled. They were confused. They said that that Lori had always been a good mother, that she cared deeply for her children, and that they never had an issue with her as a parent or for any of her parenting. And so this was just something that shocked them, and they couldn't get their heads around it. In fact, the grandmother felt that the children must be alive, and that Lori simply had them hidden somewhere out of spite because of the pending divorce with Charles Vallow. But you know, I tried to explain to them, and we talked about it later after her arrest, that something really had happened to her, that her life had been manipulated, changed by her interaction with Chad Daybell, and the ideas that she espoused, everything was based on Daybell and what Daybell said. I mean, he became her mentor in a sense, and he changed everything in her life. And I think the grandparents had a very hard time understanding all of that.
I see you writes, welcome to all panelists. This is the podcast to be on. And then a personal favorite, my hat from New Jersey, my home state, New Jersey here. So special shout out here to Jennifer Kornman. And to you, we were just talking about cameras in the courtroom, the need for transparency. It's hard for things not to be transparent in 2023, mainly because of this. Can you seat a fair jury in this day and age, particularly on a case of this magnitude, that's this high profile, that's in the news every day, that's on Twitter every day, people are tweeting? Is it possible to find 12 people who are truly impartial?
You know, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I think the answer is yes. I just wrote a book with my brother. It's called Justice in the Age of Judgment. We kind of explored that issue about these high profile trials. The centerpiece of our book was the Amanda Knox case and all the media in that case, because hers was kind of the first international trial. And to kind of take a look at, you know, what the effects are, social media, you know, and just bombardment in the internet about the case. But I really believe it's something about jurors when you get 12 people together, sworn in, and they've sworn to put aside anything they've read, anything they feel, any of their opinions, and they vow to truly and try the case dispassionately. Something happens to them. I've seen it in my own practice many times. They become this entity that tends to do the right thing. It's, you know, Abraham Lincoln said the highest calling of citizenship is jury duty. And I think people rise to that occasion over and over and over again in high profile cases, in low profile cases, and everywhere in between.
And by the way, they revealed that jurors for this trial will be making $10 a day, and if it's a half day, they're making $5. Not exactly high wages. Does that need to change? Does that aspect of the judicial system need to change? Do we need to compensate jurors better than we do now?
Not only that, I think we need to offer them grief counseling or catastrophe counseling. For example, in the case in South Florida with the mass shooting in the school. I mean, those jurors. I had lunch yesterday with one of the experts in that case. Those jurors, you know, are traumatized. So that's something else I think we need to look at when they're looking at multiple dead bodies and autopsies and parents grieving for their children. We need to make sure that the jurors are okay when they come out of the system.
And I was working for a short time for CBS here in Miami, where I am, and have interviewed a lot of the Parkland parents, and I cannot fathom having to see those autopsy photos. So that is an excellent point indeed. Adriana writes, "Hi everyone, first time catching a live from DC." Followed here by, "Hi from the Netherlands."
Wow.
You guys thought I was joking when I said global. And then we've got Boulder, Colorado. Got it all covered here. Josh, you're used to going on TV shows and playing the part of the attorney. But let me ask you, kind of from a different perspective, when you found out about this case and all the insanity enveloping it, and these 2 dead children, which is horrific, and the wife and the other bodies that have piled up, what did you say to yourself? And I mean, as a defense attorney, from that perspective, do you say this is, I mean, how do you defend this?
Well, I took it personally, really, because I've got a 2.5-year-old at home and a 3-month-old at home.
Oh, wow.
And I love them more than anything in life. And the idea of ever doing them any kind of harm is so outside of what I can comprehend that it was really disturbing to me to hear that a mother could do this to her 2 children. And I think that's how most people react to this, having kids or not. It's just one of those crimes that you cannot fathom. We just can't wrap our heads around how can a person do this. And from a defense attorney's perspective, that's going to be a really difficult argument to make. But Rick has actually pointed out a couple of things that I've been paying attention to what he's been saying about kind of the influence that Chad Daybell really had over Lori. He talked about, targeting her and the undue influence that he would carry over her as a cult leader and how he could be manipulative. And in the legal world, we would call that all coercion. So I think the defense, I would be surprised if they didn't, are going to have to somehow bring in all of this cult influence and all of this mental health issues. If we're describing her as having been a really good mother at one point, well, what happened to deteriorate this person into the monster that takes the life of her own 2 children? And if that is Chad Daybell and they can point the finger at him, and by the way, the trials have been severed, so he's not going to be sitting there in court and they can point the finger at him, I think that might be their only hope to mount some sort of defense in this really nightmare of a case.
And I'm with you. I've got 3 kids, 4 to almost 4 through 9, and it's unfathomable. Cannot imagine it. Had the same feeling because I have the only son in the family covering the Murdaugh trial. You just can't wrap your head around something that goes on in these people's minds. Anna writes, "Good evening from Poland, and I'm so thankful to Lindsay for this. I love Josh's podcast. Forgot to mention it in the intro. He hosts the podcast True Crime Daily, The Sidebar, which takes listeners behind the scenes of the country's most high-profile and notorious legal cases. So you better watch True Crime Daily, The Sidebar." That is Joshua Ritter's podcast. And Rick, I want to get back to you because Brian Enton, who's a friend of ours, for full disclosure, he had an interesting interview yesterday on News Nation. And he tweeted out saying, "I had a really eye-opening conversation with a woman who was inside Doomsday Mom Lori Vallow's circle. She explains that Lori saw her children as cockroaches controlled by a parasite and was quoted as saying, 'Killing the kids to them is mercy.' Can you please try to explain to normal people, or as normal as I can be, and STS Nation, which is far more normal, what is going on in the mind of a person like this who's obviously pretty off kilter?"
Well, let's contextualize that a bit. So in the days of the Third Reich, Joseph Goebbels would use propaganda in which he would characterize Jews as rats or vermin infiltrating Germany. They would show films of stereotypical Jews, and then they would show rats coming off of a ship that were infiltrating a port. And then genocide becomes a crime of logic. So what Lifton describes in his book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, in which he studied POWs in North Korean POW camps and how the North Koreans broke them down. One of the 8 characteristics of a thought reform program is dispensing of existence. So that's when you denigrate people outside of the group to the extent that they no longer are people. They no longer have a right to exist. You create a polarized world, a we-they mentality. And I think what Chad Daybell did with Lori Vallow over a period of time is he indoctrinated her to see the world through his eyes. And in that way, he characterized her children as zombies. They had lost their souls, and therefore killing them was a crime not only of logic, but in his twisted reasoning, compassion, because in this way they could be saved. Their issues could be resolved spiritually. And Lori Vallow was isolated with Chad Daybell, and it seems to me that she disconnected from reality. She was like so many cult members that I've met over the years in interventions and through court proceedings, where she just really isn't in the real world. She's in this kind of bubble world, an alternate reality that was constructed by Daybell. And when I see her in court and I've seen her photograph, she really doesn't seem to comprehend the gravity and the seriousness of her situation. She will smile for the camera. She will look like she is clueless. And I would say,
someone, I don't mean to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what makes someone so vulnerable? Over your career doing this, have you discovered that it is a similar personality or similar characteristics or traits that a person has that allows them to be sucked in?
I have to say that I have worked with medical doctors that were sucked in, an orthopedic surgeon, attorneys, just everybody. I think that we all have vulnerabilities and that these cult leaders can smell it like a shark in water, sensing blood and sensing vulnerability. And they drill down into those vulnerabilities and exploit them. If there would be any one narrative that I would see that would pull through many of the cases that I've dealt with, that a person wasn't happy at the time they were approached by a cult leader, in much the same way that Germany was a very unhappy country when Hitler moved into the political arena. So, Eric Hoffer wrote a book, The True Believer, and his basic theory is, if you're happy, you're not interested in radical change. But if you're unhappy and unsettled and you're looking for answers and relief, then you're more vulnerable. I think Chad Daybell may have sensed that in Lori Vallow. And I just hope that Lori and her attorney can somehow put their heads together and work together in a way to explain that to the jury. And I just don't know if Lori is willing to do that.
And conversely, cult leaders, the Chad Daybells of the world, do they all share similar traits or characteristics?
Almost, I feel like I'm meeting the same person over and over again. Psychopaths, malignant narcissists, people who are, just sociopaths. They have no sense of morality, no conscience. To them, everything is about them. They are the center of the universe. So if it's good for me, it's good. If it's bad for me, it's bad. And they don't really care who they hurt. And I've seen that over and over again with people like Keith Raniere of Nexium, who I dealt with personally for many years. He was depraved. He simply did not care who he hurt. And as many of your viewers,
was that the one at Vassar College?
No, now you're thinking of Lawrence Ray and Sarah Lawrence College.
Sarah Lawrence.
No,
okay.
Keith Raniere was the one who created a sex cult, and he had women branded with his initials by a woman who was a doctor who was under his control, who would use a cauterizing iron with no anesthetic, and it would take 30 minutes, and Raniere would watch. And he apparently gained some kind of pleasure from watching other people suffer. A sadist, to say the least.
Wow. And we're sort of doing two shows in one here. We've got the attorneys on one side and the cult guy on the other side, but it's super fascinating. And Rick, I'll have to get you back on with her, my lovely mom, who's a licensed therapist. She would love to talk to you about the psychology of all this. Abby, I know I butchered your last name. I'm not even going to try to get it right this time. But you're right. I'm so glad the evil witch, Lori, did not get her way with Larry and Kay, the grandparents. Way to go, Judge, on allowing them in. Michelle says, Happy Pesach, Passover, from Cape Town, South Africa. And then right here, friend of the show, Gigi McKelvey, Sensory Combustion, writes, have you all been watching Gigi? You need to check out her podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. She's in the courtroom covering this. Someone asked, what would you do without Gigi? And I said, I probably wouldn't have a podcast. So I really appreciate Gigi's hard work. And back to you and Josh on the jury question, since that's going on right now. Judge Boyce and basically flat out said, I'm not going to sequester the jury. This seems like the sort of trial that you would. And if you're not going to do it on, for this trial, when do you sequester a jury?
Well, I have to say also I've read all of Eric Hoffer's books, and The True Believer really comes to mind in this case for sure. That really resonated with me. I think that maybe you never sequester juries anymore. I mean, think about it. They weren't in George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, with all of the unrest in Minneapolis during that trial and the waiting for the verdict, was kind of scary in that city. You don't have sequestered juries, we had it in OJ, but you generally, more often than not, you don't see it. I think that this one should be. It's not all that expensive, and you're basically going to make sure that you've insulated this jury from juror misconduct issues and from potentially seeing the media. I mean, why not do it? It's a very high-profile case. It was a death penalty case, there in Idaho, where they now have the firing squad. And so I look at this, and I thought this in Chauvin. Why not? Why not guard against an appeal by making sure that you've got the jurors in a little bit of a cocoon in a very high-profile case that's being watched around the world?
Josh, you're Prosecutor of the Year, 2015. Let's assume you're in Ada County and you are part of the state's team, perhaps the lead prosecutor. What are you making sure to point out in opening statements if they do in fact happen on Monday? What is critical to make clear to the jury?
That's a great question, because I think the prosecution, if I was handling this case, I would just try to be about as straightforward about it as possible. That listen, we're going to put aside all of that noise about cults and Chad Daybell and basically everything Rick's been talking about and the influence that they can have over people. Put all that aside. This case is about two children who had their lives taken at the hands of their own mother, and her whatever role she played in the murder of Chad Daybell's wife, and just try to be straightforward about it and common sense about it, and be like, you're going to hear a lot of noise and you're going to hear a lot of things that are intended to distract you, but I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes on the ball here and find justice for these victims. That, I think, is the tone that you have to strike as the prosecutor in this case.
And it's not unlike, news people, what I did for a living, which is just telling a straightforward story clearly and concisely. And like you said, getting rid of the excess fat there. Rick, to you, this is an important comment from Jacqueline Bolden. So thank you. She writes, I hope they have members of LDS who can refute this cult as conducting themselves with mainstream LDS. And I want to be very clear on that. They were not part of LDS, not even an offshoot, correct? LDS is a proper religion practiced by many. This was not that, right?
Absolutely. Chad Daybell basically created his own religion, which, as I said before, was really a kind of hybrid composite. And the LDS Church frequently has had to deal with these kind of misconceptions. For example, the polygamist cults that I've dealt with, such as Warren Jeffs, the FLDS, is often confused with mainstream LDS Mormons. And And it's the Mormon Church itself that has fought against these polygamist groups at times and helped people that were victimized by them. So, yeah, I think we do need to make those distinctions. And I would see Chad Daybell as kind of comparable to a Bernie Madoff in the sense that Bernie Madoff played the Jewish community. He came as a Jew to Jewish people to invest in him. And I think that this is what Chad Daybell has done. He came to the Mormon community, people that were strongly devoted to the church, and he told them, I have new revelation. I'm a prophet. And he used that affinity in order to take advantage of them.
Laura Monto, if I'm saying that correctly, writes, Rick, this is going right back to you. Even with all this going on with Lori and Chad, I know people who are still getting sucked into this cult, not Chad's, but similar beliefs. It's scary. Is it safe to say that as long as there are human beings around, there are going to be cult leaders and cult followers?
Well, yeah, I think people get rich from leading cults. I mean, when L. Ron Hubbard died, who founded Scientology in 1986, his estate was worth $600 million. When Reverend Moon died, he left his family $1 billion. I think people don't realize how lucrative the cult business really is. And there are many, many groups like this. There are at least 10,000 groups that have generated complaints to the International Cultic Studies Association in North America alone. And I think with all of the tax advantages and the wall of separation and the immunities or protections that it affords these cult leaders, many of them move to the US because this is, for many cult leaders, the Disneyland that they dream of, where they are not accountable and where they don't have to be financially transparent.
Ania says hello from Poland, followed here by Tim, who's becoming a friend of the show. Good afternoon, STS Nation. And my favorite comment so far of the day, and I'll tell you why. Lindsay Shea writes, my Jewish grandmother was named Bubby too. Ethel. Ethel's the name of my boxer who's in the next room. So holds a special place in my heart. And back to you. This is not a death penalty case. Should it really be one? It's sort of not one because of a technicality, but should this be a death penalty case and trial?
Well, I thought it should have been. And you're right, it was a technicality. The judge basically said there was late discovery in the case. And given that, he thought could be appellate issues. And in a death penalty case, that was a concern. So based on that, he took the death penalty off the table. I mean, it's highly unusual, I think, for a judge to take the death penalty off the table when it is due to something technical like that, not due to some other argument or defect. But I think that because she was found for a time incompetent to stand trial, and obviously that, I think, was because of kind of a kooky belief she had, or a crazy belief she had on what Chad had to say. That was the incompetence. And so when you get into this case, I think, what Rick's been talking about, is that going to be your defense? And do you put someone to death if they're mentally ill or have mental challenges? And the answer is we don't like to do that in this country. So in a way, to me, that decision made sense when you look at the grand scheme of things in her particular case. And it's off the table. She's very lucky indeed.
And Ann, this question is from one Ann to another, from Ann Vroom to you. For lawyer Ann, what are the elements of conspiracy? That is, what does the state have to prove to establish that? Thank you.
Well, I mean, basically that you're acting with another and making a decision to do something that constitutes a crime. And it's an intentional crime. And so in speaking to this case, I mean, did they do this together? Sure sounds like it. The bodies are buried in his yard. You have that phone call between them, and they're clearly indicating they know there's something very bad that's going to be found in the search of the property. So I think that would be met in both of their cases.
Jay Thomas writes, Josh, for you, do you think Alex killed the children? My question to you is, the defense going to try to put this on Lori Vallow's brother, who's dead, and say it was his idea? He was around all of these deaths. Cell phone digital forensics show that he was in Rexburg around the time that the children went missing at that property. So will that be a defense strategy to say, hey, it wasn't Lori, it was her brother?
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard that come up before.
Yeah.
I had always thought from the beginning that she's going to point the finger at Chad and say that, listen, he's the one who ran everything. I didn't even know these murders were taking place, or had I was under his influence and couldn't fight back and stop him from doing what he was doing. But the point is, whether they're pointing the finger at Alex or they're pointing the finger at Chad, they've got to present to these jurors, if they hope to have any kind of success in their defense, a bad guy. They got to present to the jurors somebody who's responsible for this, that isn't their client sitting right next to them, and the mother of the children who are dead. And so you may see both. I mean, that's the one thing about the defense, is they don't have to present any kind of clarity. They deal with confusion, and they deal in the realm of jurors not quite understanding what took place. Because if the jurors end up not quite understanding what took place, was Alex, was it Chad, they don't know, well, then that's, amounts to reasonable doubt. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see any number of kind of possible theories and third-party culpability, things presented to this jury.
And Michelle, in South Africa, and I'll toss this one to you, how would the presentation of the state's case change once they know exactly who the jury consists of? I'm an attorney, but we don't have a jury system, and I find it fascinating.
Well, I these days, especially in a high-profile case, the jurors are well researched by the lawyers and their staff. I mean, you've got a lot you can find on the internet. You always end up with a group that maybe wasn't your top pick, but you're basically trying to, it's called like jury selection, but it's really jury elimination, that you're eliminating people that may be difficult for you in your case. Once you have them seated and you've got a jury, then you may have people that have certain things in their background that you want to speak to, and you change and tweak your case a little bit, to make sure that your audience, is going to be receptive to your case. And I do that in all my cases. Like, once I have my jury, then it's like, well, this is my audience, and I've got to make sure that I tailor my case to those people. I mean, the media is important. That's secondary. You've got your client's reputation after the trial, basically, that you've got to protect in the public eye. But the most important thing are those people sitting right in front of you in 12 chairs.
Annalise writes, catching STS live for the first time. Hi from New Zealand. What is the difference between being part of a cult, Rick, and forming a group with cult traits? Is it religion and critical intent colliding?
I think it's not about what the group believes, but rather how it's structured and how it behaves. Keep in mind that not all cults are religious. Keith Raniere led Nexium, which was a seminar selling multi-level marketing scheme. There are other groups that are based on theosophy, martial arts. I dealt with one group that was based on marathon running. So it's really about the structure of the group, the dynamics of the group, not about its beliefs. So there are many facades that these groups work behind. And I think what it behooves people to do is look at, kind of lift the hood on the vehicle and look and see how it is put together, and compare that to established criteria dealing with thought reform and destructive cults, and see if it parallels that. And that is our best protection.
A follow-up question for you here. It's hard to imagine Chad as a cult leader sucking in all these people. He is so uninspiring. He's not charismatic or appealing. What drew in these people? Great point. I look at him. He looks like the most boring, dry guy in the room. What's going on here?
Well, as we say in Yiddish, he's kind of a nebbish. But having established that he's a nebbish, I've met many, very uninspiring people who lead cults. So the question is not whether or not he's charismatic, but how devious is he and how manipulative is he? And let's keep in mind that he wasn't a very successful cult leader. He only had a few followers. At one time, basically, he had Lori Vallow in tow. And a few others in Rexburg. Apparently, Alex Cox was very devoted to him as well and willing to do things for him. So Chad Daybell is an example of not such a super successful cult leader, but still devastatingly deadly. And the consequences of his leadership are devastating.
And I believe I know the answer to this question, even though I'm not a lawyer, but Peggy asks, are possible jurors warned about having to see the horrible pictures of victims? And a perfect example, yesterday, one of the people being questioned was an Iraq War veteran, and they were concerned that maybe it would trigger some sort of PTSD. He said he would be fine. They spoke to another woman who turned out was a mother of 5, and she flat out said, I cannot be impartial here. They were asking them to be brutally honest. She was brutally honest. She was dismissed. But what about the question?
Well, I think you have to ask that question. I mean, the whole thing of voir dire means to speak the truth, or to speak to see in French. And so you're basically saying, are they qualified to serve as jurors? And so a lot of what we ask in jury selection, I don't think is permissible when we try to indoctrinate the jury to our side. You see that a lot in trials. But it is very key to make sure that that jury and those jurors are qualified to deal with that kind of gruesome and graphic evidence. And if they clearly cannot, they need to be excused. And I think excused for cause, not just on a peremptory challenge. So that was a very honest potential juror said, I can't do it. Frankly, I think, everyone should ask themselves, could I do that? I've never had to do it. I've done it as a prosecutor, but what about as a juror? Decide the case and not be absolutely prejudiced against Lori or Chad in his case, just by seeing those pictures. Good for that juror.
And Ann, I'm the son of a psychiatrist, the son of a social worker, and I'm intrigued more than I probably should be about the appearance of the defendant. And we had a whole discussion yesterday, and 2 jury consultants said she should not be wearing black. She's wearing black again today with the reading glasses. They say that she should be in pastels, looking a little softer. Someone said, well, maybe the black implies that she's in mourning. Do you have any thoughts on this, or am I overthinking it?
My dad's a psychiatrist and so is my brother. And my mom's a psychiatric nurse. But, I look at this and I think pastels, would be good. I really think that defendants should look as neutral as possible. Nothing that stands out. I think black probably stands out. I think her mannerisms have been so bizarre, but maybe that feeds into the defense that she was completely indoctrinated by Chad Daybell. But I don't think she should wear anything that stands out. I don't think anybody should in a courtroom. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I don't think you want to have anyone be a focus of the jury, because that's what they talk about on breaks. They can't talk about the case. They talk about what people are wearing, things like that. So you don't want to draw undue attention to anybody or anything they're wearing.
And Josh, you're the only one with a sport jacket on. My mother would be proud of you. Anytime we go on Court TV on Vinnie Politan's show, she screams at me, and I put on my sport jacket because it's not worth arguing with her. She says you have to be respectful. So on my show, I can wear this. On his show, I have to wear the sport jacket. But is dress important for the defendant?
Yeah, I think with what Ann said, to an extent. I mean, you don't want to wear something ridiculous, something that the jurors are going to be distracted by, something that they're going to be talking about on their break. I think it should just kind of blend in with the background. But Joel, you pointed out the bigger problem of all of this is kind of her facial expressions and just the way she carries herself in court. I don't know. All of the pictures I've seen are always of her with this bizarre, serene smile on her face that does not reflect the kind of tragedy and magnitude of the moment that we're in. That to me is bizarre. And I don't know if that's just what the cameras are catching and what they happen to be publishing. But to me, if I'm concerned about, what signals is she giving to the juror, it's far less about what she's wearing, far more about how she's behaving and conducting herself. I mean, we saw so much of that analysis done in the Murdaugh case. The camera was on him almost through every piece of testimony, and so much microanalyzation of, oh boy, did you see he cried during that part? Or, oh, he put his hand to his head during another piece of testimony. And yes, that is the media and everybody kind of just microanalyzing everything, but it's also what the jurors are doing. I mean, they're sitting there, and for every piece of testimony that seems important, I can tell you, they looked straight to that defendant the first time to get their reaction. Did that point resonate with them? How are they reacting to this testimony they're now hearing? So it's far more about, appearance, demeanor, the way they carry themselves.
And the minute those jurors were on the Today Show, the very first thing they said was, "Those weren't real tears. He was wiping snot." So they're making those observations for sure. Rick, to you, Jessica K. Question: how does deprogramming work? Can it be successful for Chad and Lori? Has it already been attempted with them?
I don't think it's been attempted. You can't deprogram a cult leader because they haven't been indoctrinated or programmed to begin with. But someone like Lori Vallow, yes, that could be done. And I've done over 500 interventions across the United States and internationally. And my success rate is about 7 out of 10. And what basically happens is a 3 to 4 day discussion with family members, much like a drug or alcohol intervention, in which you discuss basically 4 blocks or categories of discussion. One would be, what is a destructive cult? How do you define it? Number 2, how does thought reform work? How does undue influence work in a cult? How would we know it? What is gaslighting, mystical manipulation? How does that work? So that's the second block. Third block is, what do you not know about the group or leader that you should know to make a more informed decision? Are there secrets? Are they hiding things from you? What is behind the curtain? And then finally, the fourth block is the family, the people that have convened the intervention. What are their concerns? Why are they alarmed? What is it that has happened that has caused them to undertake an intervention? So you go through those 4 categories of discussion, and there's a lot of research, documentation that's brought out and studied, some documentary films, etc. But it's a dialogue, and it takes a good deal of time, probably 8 hours a day, maybe 6 hours a day for 3 or 4 days. And in most cases, what happens is the person's critical thinking is stimulated, and they begin to essentially think their way out. And I don't think Lori Vallow has begun that process at all, from what I've seen.
My new favorite comment comes from the UK, from Julie Frew. "We are a cult. STS Nation. Ha ha ha. This is a good cult. Is this a cult, Rick?"
No, I don't think so. I think that
Not
many
yet.
times the word cult is now being thrown around in politics in a way that does a disservice to the word and the definition. We should use that word very carefully to describe a very specific type of leader or group, and not use it just as a disparagement to basically take down a political opponent or someone we don't like.
But you can be a member of this cult, and you can be addicted to this cult. It's all healthy for you. Annalise writes, "This is an important question, Rick. I'm going to toss it right back to you. Hi from New Zealand. First live to the panel. What is your advice if you think children are at risk like this? How could this have been prevented? How do you intervene with cults? Was there a way to save these children, knowing the path she was going down?"
Well, I think when the police questioned Charles Vallow, and he really laid it out there, and he said, "Look, my wife she's just like, she's crazy. She's completely detached from reality. She thinks she's a god. She's involved with this bizarre kind of religious group or leader." And when he shared that with the police, I think that they kind of dropped the ball. And I think that the people that interviewed Lori Vallow subsequent to that incident, they also dropped the ball. But to be fair, Lori Vallow was feigning that this was all made up by her husband, that it was ridiculous, that they were going through a separation and divorce, and he was just trying to attack her. But at that juncture, perhaps if Lori's daughter, who was 17 at the time, or thereabouts, if she would have spoken up, if someone had talked to Child Protective Services and made it clear that the children might be in danger, that could have helped to take them out of harm's way. I've been involved in many custody battles in court and visitation battles on how visitation is conducted with children when a parent is in a cult. And I think that many times authorities do intervene and do protect the children. And I think it's sad that that didn't happen in this situation.
And to you, since we are dealing with jury selection still, if you're the defense, who do you want sitting on your jury panel?
Well, I want people that are not conservative, not ex-military. I want people that are probably not LDS. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. LDS would be fine given this extreme in this case. But I also want, when I'm defending, when I was a prosecutor, I want the jurors to all kind of look like they all belong together somehow. As a defense lawyer, I want to make sure they look like they don't at all. Like that. I want to have kind of disparate personalities, ages, beliefs, etc., with the hopes that I might be able to sway at least one juror, for the defense. And I'm looking for people that keep an open mind on mental health issues, and can look at Lori in a way that might be sympathetic, that a lot of people, like Rick said, can fall prey to a cult. And even though they're normal, they might be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, and it may well be the case with her. I don't know if that's going to be their defense. But I really look for people that are odd. I mean, I know the word's wrong, but they're just different. They're on a different path. Those are the jurors I want in a defense case.
And Diane says hello from Nampa, Idaho, a town I'd never heard of till Diane said hello the other day. Now I know Nampa, not to be confused with Napa. Josh, you're a former prosecutor of the year. Who are you looking for on your jury if you are the state in this case?
I've always said that when I was a prosecutor, my favorite juror is the blue collar guy. Perhaps he's got a mustache, maybe a little bit of a belly. He's got his fingers crossed over him, and he's just no nonsense. And he's just straightforward. And he doesn't care about conspiracy theories and slick lawyers and their lawyering. He's just, give me the facts. I'm no nonsense. And I think that exactly applies here, that, like we've talked about through all of this, the defense for the large part is going to be concentrating on mental health and cults and how the influence they may have. I want jurors sitting on there who are going to think to themselves, you took the lives of 2 innocent children, and I don't care what you have to say about it. I'm going to hold you responsible for it.
This is an interesting comment from Melter Skelter for Rick here. For the cult expert, and he is the cult expert, the followers continue to believe after their leader is exposed and jailed, which Chad's other followers still support him after the kids were found.
I think in this case, probably doubtful, but I have seen people continue to support a cult leader despite what is going on. And I reflect on Charlie Manson, and the Manson family, and how these young women, really girls, that were Charlie's girls, they would call them, would sing and praise him through the entire trial, and they were loyal for quite some time. The key to dissipating that loyalty is them being unplugged from the leader long enough that they begin to lose their, if you will, the energy of the program. It begins to ebb, much like a battery is running down. It needs to dock in order to be recharged. And that docking is interacting with the leader and being, indoctrinated anew. So I think what happened with the Manson family is, as they were separated from Charles Manson and their families had access to them, and they no longer were hearing Charlie's voice in their heads, they were able to slowly but surely gain their individual identity again. And I think that can happen. But sadly, as we all know regarding the Manson family, the horrible nature of the crimes that they committed put them in, at first, death penalty and then life in prison.
Right.
And even the most liberal governor of California is not interested in signing off on their release. And these women are elderly women now, that are at the end of their lives. And I think that's what looms ahead for Lori Vallow, that regardless of how she tries to mitigate what happened, there are these deaths, these horrible deaths that loom over her. And ultimately, she will probably spend the rest of her life in prison.
It sure seems like she's heading that way. Laura Monto, and for you, they're limiting media exposure to ensure Chad gets a fair jury, but his lawyer gets to attend Lori's trial to see the state's case. Hashtag seems fair. A lot of people were asking about that because Chad's lawyer has been around during jury selection, I believe in the overflow room. I'm not sure that he's been in the courtroom. Is that a SOP, standard operating procedure, for the next defendant in line's attorney to be present while this jury selection is going on?
It's not unusual. I mean, but I don't understand why they don't have like a live feed in this case, that everyone can see, just like they had in the Depp case. I just finished a case where they did that. You have a live feed. Maybe it's not on TV, but you can have, a live feed for public access. But no, it's not unusual. Did something happen again? I guess not.
Oh, you're good. You're good. And
Okay.
I know your billable hours are high, so we're going to wrap it in a few minutes, but
Okay.
I'm fascinated by the panel. Paul Printed Heart writes, I'm afraid they're going to blame everyone but Lori. Weren't there a few deaths before Chad or attempts? Josh, what do you make of this? I mean, are they going to, the defense obviously is going to try to do that, correct?
Oh, 100%. Like I said, they have to make this about other people either being responsible for it directly, or if she was involved, she was under the coercion and manipulation of somebody else, likely Chad Daybell. They need to offer to these jurors some other bad guy, some other person to hold responsible for this. I don't know how successful they'll be in all of that, but that's got to be their strategy.
And by the way, Marshmallow, who's being a pain in the you-know-what in the chat section, he doesn't know what happened to our friend Brad when Brad gave us 1 star. STS Nation revolted. So you better watch out, Marshmallow. We're coming for you. Rick, to you, Lori Vallow claimed in divorce documents, Charles Vallow claimed in divorce documents that Lori believed she was a godlike figure chosen to carry out the work of 144,000 believers. Multiple friends cited in police reports that the couple believed, meaning Chad and Lori, that they could drive out evil spirits and seek revelations from quote unquote beyond the spiritual veil. There was this zombie scoring. Lori believed she could teleport between Arizona and Hawaii, and they believed that JJ and Tylee became zombies. I mean, just reading this out loud, it is utter insanity. So just remind us again how someone can be persuaded into believing that this is true.
I think a lot of it is social isolation. The abusive, controlling leader or group isolates the individual, cuts them off from any kind of accurate feedback or an outside frame of reference, and they just create this little cocoon for them to exist within. And so they don't hear other people critiquing what the leader is saying. They can't compare notes with someone easily outside of the leader's group and outside of the leader's observation. And so I think that's what happened to Lori. But, having said that, what Chad Daybell is going to find out is what cult leaders who go to court find out, that regardless of how fantastic you think you are and how incredible your beliefs may seem to you, in a court of law, it's based on facts, not fantasy. And so that belief system now becomes really an encumbrance to Daybell, and it becomes something that Lori Vallow is also encumbered by. I think that's the thing about going to court. Cult leaders frequently think that they can get anything over. Certainly Charles Manson felt that. He wanted to blame his girls for the murder and not himself. But eventually, when cult leaders go to court, they have to face the realities of life and the judicial system, which looks harshly upon fantasy and instead seeks facts.
Right.
question here from Elf. Wasn't Tylee being poisoned by Lori? Munchausen by proxy started prior to Chad. Doctors should have recognized this. Rick, do you know anything about this?
Well, I've heard about it, but that is not my particular area of expertise. From what I understand from the grandparents, Lori was an attentive and caring mother. And I don't think that she would have behaved in the way that she ultimately did if it had not been for Chad Daybell.
Caroline writes, hello, everybody from Donegal. That's in Ireland. Such a friendly chat. And we just had someone say hello from Santa Barbara, California. That's where my wife and I got married, which is why I had that up there. So special hello to you. Rick, someone tweeted at me and they said Joel, but they really should have said Rick. Do we have any idea how big Chad and Lori's following was?
Oh, it was less than 10 people.
Right.
I mean, it was a handful of people, a very small group. And he tried to recruit from this network of people called Preparing a People, but he was largely unsuccessful. And many of those people thought he was, quite frankly, weird and avoided him.
And then we'll get to final thoughts here. But is there such a thing? This appears to be a slam dunk case. Does that exist?
I'm sorry, my battery's getting low, so I keep getting warnings. No case is slam dunk. I mean, there's cases, that you think you should win and you don't. I mean, nothing's slam dunk. It's not over until the fat lady sings, so to speak. And, you may have an opponent that's a lot better than you. You may have something happen in the trial you didn't anticipate. You can never say there's a slam dunk. You need to prepare, and do that throughout the trial until the very end.
Joshua Ritter, the man in the sport coat. He was named the 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year by the Association of Deputy District Attorneys. You can tell he is a savvy lawyer. He's part of the Eldabe Ritter trial lawyers firm. And perhaps most importantly, he hosts the podcast, True Crime Daily, The Sidebar. You better check it out. True Crime Daily, The Sidebar. First of all, Josh, we hope you will come back. But what are you looking for, particularly when you're podcasting and you're covering this case in the beginning days of this trial? What will you be watching for?
One thing that we've kind of touched on but haven't really fleshed out is the idea that Idaho doesn't have a traditional insanity defense. But I think you're going to see a lot of presentation about her mental health because it goes towards her mens rea, her mental state. Could she have committed malice, premeditated murder? So that's what I'm curious to see, how that all plays out, the mental aspect of this and how her attorneys plan to get that in front of a jury.
Ann Bremner, she is a trial attorney, one of the nation's most recognized legal analysts. If you haven't seen her before, you've been sleeping under a rock. In her 35 years of practice, she's been lead counsel for many highly publicized court cases. She was also a prosecuting attorney in a little county called King County, where there's a little city called Seattle. And she's a regular contributing legal analyst for Fox, CNN, MSNBC, HLN, the list goes on. Now STS, she's on that list. I don't think I asked this as explicitly as Papa Bear from Moscow, Idaho, so I will now, Ann. Do your guests, you think the defense will present a cult angle for Lori? That is, she was under Chad's cultish control and therefore could not be fully responsible for her decisions and actions, etc., and any other final thoughts you'd like to add?
No, I think they have no choice. I think they have to do that. And like I said, I'm in Washington, right by Idaho. Idaho can be pretty conservative. So, I think that's about the only thing that's going to work for her. And she's just not in the right state, to be lodging a cult offense. But there she is. So that's my 2 cents. I was fascinated by what Rick had to say. And also, I've been on Josh's podcast, and he does a wonderful job, just like you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks from both of us. And my wife, the chief marketing officer, there's still time to hit the like button. Please do that. It will help get the algorithm chugging. So finally, of course, Rick Ross, he is a cult intervention specialist, frequently a court expert witness concerning groups called cults. He was contacted by the grandparents of JJ, who, of course, are Larry and Kay Woodcock. He is the founder and executive director of the Cult Education Institute and the author of Cults Inside Out. Rick, what do you do at the Cult Education Institute? It should have probably been my first question, but instead it's my last.
Well, it was launched as an online library archive in 1996. And it's one of the largest repositories of historical information about controversial groups and movements, some called cults, that's online. When I launched it in 1996, I thought to myself, this is the end of cults as we know it, because people will be able to just go online and get the truth about their secrets, their whatever they're hiding. How naive that was. I mean, it's really quite the opposite. Cults now use social media platforms and the internet and recruit online and extract money from people online. I mean, in the old days, in the 80s and the 90s, when you had to press the flesh and meet people face to face to recruit them, those days are really receding, and people are most often recruited online. But the Cult Education Institute is still there, still growing, ever under construction, to afford people the opportunity to read the information about these groups before they become too involved.
Ashley Smith became a new YouTube member, so we thank her for that. Century Combustion, amazing guest today. Rick has some fascinating insight, as the two other guests do as well, but Rick covers something that is just so mind-blowing to so many of us, and he's really eloquent about breaking it all down. I've got to ask you, Rick, because I know you talked about NXIVM. You also worked on this Sweat Lodge Guru case with James Arthur Ray, which I remember. I believe that was in Arizona when he had people sitting in these basically hot saunas. You worked the Waco case, which is now a big Netflix documentary. Of all the cults in contemporary times, which is sort of the penultimate in your opinion?
Well, I guess the one everyone remembers is Charles Manson and the Manson family. I will talk to young people in interventions and say Jim Jones, Jonestown, and they kind of look at me and say, what's that? You know, but if I say Charles Manson, they will say, I absolutely know who that is. I think for better or for worse, Charlie Manson lives on, not as the rock star that he had hoped, but nevertheless as the most iconic cult leader of modern history.
Wow.
How about Heaven's Gate? Where do they rank?
Oh, that is really a bizarre group. Heaven's Gate never had more than a few members. When they all died, there were less than 40 bodies that were recovered, including the leader. They followed this guy, Marshall Applewhite, who was at one time a professor of music at a university in Texas. And then he decided that he really was Jesus, returning to Earth like an away team from Star Trek. His religion was a blend of Star Treks and sci-fi, Christianity, and a dash of the dark. You know, he would say that the world was infested with satanic influences, and he would talk about the Luciferians and so forth. The man was in and out of mental hospitals. He would check himself in and then check out. And in the end, I think that he just went completely insane and off the rails. And he took all those innocent people with him. And it was just a tragic thing for the families that had to recover these bodies, many of whom had not seen their loved ones for decades.
Devon Diamond writes, SCS really lives up to the motto, best guess, that is for sure. Not so sure about the host part. With excellent talking points and very little fluff. And Jennifer writes, absolutely so grateful for this channel. Love to you, Joel and Carm, and all the family for your loss. For those who don't know, my father passed away, which is hard for me to even say because I can't believe it. 2 weeks ago, almost, not even 2 weeks ago, praying for comfort and peace. And I have to tell you guys, I've said this before, both my mother and I cannot believe the outpouring, and it has really comforted us. So Thank you so much. She is not going to be here this Sunday. She was with him for 65 years. So it's going to take her a while. My mother has survived the Holocaust, the loss of her own child, and this for sure will be the most difficult, not to bring everyone down at the very end. But my dad was a great guy, and I posted about him on the eulogy on Facebook for those who care to check it out at Surviving the Survivor. And you guys were fantastic. Josh, I hope you will come back.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. And Rick, you have to come back, Rick, because I'm absolutely fascinated, and I want to get you on with my mother so she can break out all her therapist questions on you. And the great Ann Bremner just disappeared, so we will take that as a goodbye from her. Tomorrow, we are back live, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, with Detective Phil Waters, who's investigated over 400 homicides, and former FBI agent Scott Duffy. And we're going to be talking about Brian Kohberger and this very case. Until then, love you, America. Love you, STS Nation. Love you, everyone.